Okay. So along those lines, Jason asked the question, any suggested template contracts or boilerplate language to use for client work?
Oh, yes, I have many. So this is probably one of the most common things I do for clients. Either putting together I think what they are asking is, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what they're asking is, if I, a developer, am being hired by someone else to develop for them, what should I put in the contract I sign to protect myself? It also can go the other way. If you are a developer and need to hire additional hands to do UI, to do more coding, whatever, you should also have a contractor agreement to hire them that should protect you as the company or as the person hiring. So some of these apply to both, but I'll answer that question directly. So client work, I assume, means hiring yourself out to a client for whom you are developing. So in no particular order, and there are more things, but basically I'd have to just walk people through a full contract. Things that are very important and that should be addressed in this agreement. So first off, have the agreement. Negotiate it, talk about it, get all the deal points together and write it and sign it before you do the work, before you do any work. That is my very strong suggestion. It's not always the case, but even if you've started, fine. Say, you know what, before I go any further, I need to get this signed, right? The more you work without the contract, the more risk you take on that all that work, that the person flakes out and now you don't have a written contract. So it's this whole fight to get paid and it's not clear exactly what the terms are. And that's just a nightmare. It's much better to do this up front. So some of the terms that should be in this contract. First off, you want to think about the term, by which I mean, how long does it last? When does it start? How long does it last? And connected to that are going to be termination provisions, meaning how do I get out of this thing? How does each party get out of it? So, can each party terminate for breach, meaning I didn't get paid and it's been 30 days, so now I'm out, I don't have to do any more? Are there scenarios where you're allowed to just leave? Are there scenarios where your client is allowed to say, you know what, I canceled the project? That's usually called termination for convenience, meaning, and that, they may ask for that. If they ask for that, that can be a real hassle. If you've stopped taking work, you don't have anything in the pipeline, you thought you'd be working on this for the next 4 months, they cancel it a month in. That is why, connected to that right, if they have it, you want to ask for a kill fee. Meaning, sure, you can decide that you're not going to make the app anymore, you ran out of funding. But if you do that and you cancel before we're done, I get paid the following kill fee to make up for the fact that I didn't have anything in the pipeline. And that can be different things. It could be a specific amount. It could be all of the next milestone. It could be whatever, half of whatever's not finished yet. So I think that's a prudent protection. Speaking of payments, that's the next topic. I mentioned milestones. Depending on what you're doing, you could be doing it hourly, but assuming that the idea is that you're making a full app for someone who doesn't really know about software development, they've got an idea, you're doing the development for them. When you describe, you want to have a document attached that has, something called like a statement of work or a schedule of work. It can be called whatever you want, but a document that lays out the technical specifications, that lays out the specifics of what you're making, what the features will be, in reasonable detail. Obviously, it's an iterative process that's going to change, but the key here is that you want in writing what the rough scope of the project is. And that should be broken down into milestones. So as you get paid, you don't want to say, I get my full payment at the end. You definitely want to ask for some amount up front. Half would be great. That's to protect you in case they flake out, because then it's always better to have money in your pocket and have them have to ask you for it back than for you to get, let go and then have to come after them for the money. That is a huge hassle. So having some up front mitigates your risk. The rest of it, you want to break the development into milestones, first vertical slice, first playable alpha, beta, and then gold master, however you want to split it up. And you get paid at each of those things when they accept those milestones. That's a prudent way to set it up. That way, you're getting paid as you go, and you're never really behind if they flake out. So the kill fee could be set up as, I get all of the next milestone as my, compensation for you bailing out. So that's all the compensation stuff in very general terms. I think those are important. A couple other things. I mentioned that you can see all this stuff is kind of connected. I mentioned the scope of work. that we want to have, you want to define roughly what the scope of the project is. That's important because you should also have a section that prevents what I like to call scope creep, which is just the worst thing ever. And it comes up a lot when you're doing client work, especially for people who've never handled software development before. So someone who's like, I've got a great idea for an app. Will you make it for me? Okay, great. They do not understand how software development works. They think it's like painting a picture. Oh, well, it's going to take you 20 hours. And they say, hey, make that a little more blue, as if that will take 3 minutes and it won't require you to rebuild an entire section and 3 more weeks of work. So, and it can be honest, but you can die this death of 1,000 cuts where the project was a flat fee, $40,000. Then as you get into it, they start saying, oh, can you change this? And would you tweak that and do this? And could we replace this? Now that I see it, I don't really like it. And suddenly you're doing twice as much work and the flat fee is the same. That becomes a really bad deal quickly. So if you've defined what the scope is and roughly what the features are, the maximum fee, whatever, Twitter integration, or if it's a game, right? Like 7 unique character models and 12 levels and, the blah, 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 blah. That way, if they ask for more, you put a piece in the contract, and these usually aren't in there by default. I always add them when people have me review, that says, if you ask for an increase, if you ask for a change, and I deem it to be a material increase in scope, so if it's going to increase the scope of this work by, pick a number, at 5%, whatever, 10%, then I'm entitled to send you a quote that says, this is going to increase the scope. It's going to cost this many more dollars. Do you want me to do it? And you don't have to do that extra work unless they agree to the extra money. That's called a change order. That's a great protection to stop you from getting screwed by the client that kind of gives you death by 1,000 revisions. So I think that's one of my kind of pro tips to definitely throw in there. I always put them in when I'm drafting contracts from this perspective. Let's see. Speaking of the content and what you're creating, I think it's also important to have a clear approval process. So we talked about going through and having milestones, right? You want to have somewhere in the contract a little rule book that basically says, look, when I hand you the first vertical slice, or I hand you, some milestone, because I get paid when you accept the milestone. Well, what does it mean for you to accept it? I'm going to give it to you. How many days do you have to turn it around? You don't want this to all be blank, because then they could go on, oh, I was on vacation. 3 weeks later, you're just sitting there waiting, not doing any work, not getting paid, right? You want to say, company shall have 5 days to review. Then they're going to tell you if it's accepted or denied. If it's rejected, then they're going to tell you why it's rejected and what you can do to fix it. And you have X days to fix it. And then they re-review it. And you might even put a maximum number of times that this can happen to stop infinite revisions. And you want to have a default rule, like if they don't get back to you in 3 days or 5 days, then it's automatically assumed to be accepted and they owe you the money. Because you want to know exactly when you're going to get paid, right? You don't want to be having to kind of constantly call them and do all this. And this stuff absolutely happens. And it's not just because people are like evil and don't want to pay. People always get into this. They could be out of money. They could be doing other things. They could have a different idea of when they have to pay you. Put it all in the contract. There's a rule book. It makes it a lot less of a fight because you just point to the contract and you're like, you had 5 days. You didn't get back to me. Now you owe me. This is clear. In the words of an attorney friend of mine, fuck you, pay me. Very, very excellent attorney, Gabe Levine out in California, I think coined that as part of in a video that made the rounds. But yeah, he's 100% right. You should make sure all these provisions are there to make sure you get paid and that it's clear. And that if they decide not to pay you, you've got a really clear rule book to point at and say, go to hell. You need to pay me right now. It makes it a lot easier. And if they decide to fight you on it and they get a lawyer, their lawyer will look at it and say, you should probably pay them. This is pretty clear, right? That's the goal, is that they don't have a leg to stand on.
So is that where it starts? Is collecting the money? Is that where it starts? Basically the two lawyers getting in the room and kind of looking at the contract and saying, oh, no, you should pay these guys. I mean, how do you collect your money?
Well, here's the interesting thing about a contract. It shouldn't even get to the point where lawyers need to be involved, or at least two lawyers need to be involved, because the ideal scenario is someone approaches me, I'm a developer, and says, I want you to develop my app. And the developer says, I listen to the Corona Geeks podcast. I'm forewarned and forearmed with all sorts of useful knowledge. I know that I should have a contract. They hand them a well-drafted contract that has all these protections in it. They talk about it with the other side so that both sides understand what the rules are. And by discussing the contract and negotiating it, now you have a scenario where both sides have actually kind of engaged and thought about it. A lot of times people make a deal and they both have the best intentions, but because they haven't really talked about it, each side has these assumptions that are different than the other side. By the simple act of negotiating a contract tends to bring people's minds a little closer together, which interestingly makes it less likely that there'll be a fight. And if there is a fight, there's a clear contract, there's a clear rule book to go to. And so you can just be like, look, I'm sorry, but you do have to pay me because look at section 5B, you had 5 days, here's the timestamp, I sent you the email 7 days ago, you never replied, so it's deemed accepted. And that should be the end of it, because if they're reasonable, they'll realize, oh yeah, I did agree to that. There's not really a way for me to fudge that. If they're really crazy and they hire a lawyer, and it gets to that point, again, having a good contract, that lawyer, if they're a good lawyer and they're not just trying to tell the client what they want to hear, will look at it and say, yeah, you don't really have a leg to stand on here. Let's settle this. So I think all of that is there to help you, to provide protection for both sides, honestly, so that there's clarity, so that you can get paid, so they know what they're getting, and that they have the right to approve stuff, but also that how quickly that's going to happen. A couple of smaller final pieces. Well, one more big topic and then two little bits. The topic of intellectual property, the rights. This is huge, right? So I just talked about the scope of the work, termination, like how you get out of it. So what do you have to do? How do you get out of it? How do you get paid? These are the things we talked about, all very important. And then the last one is who has the rights and when. If you're doing client work, as the person in the chat put it, that probably means that they're hiring you to make an app and they basically want to own the app, right? A couple things that are relevant to software developers. So one, it's fine, probably you're okay with the idea that they own the IP to the app, right? You're making it for them. It's not the app you're making. They hired you, they're paying you. That's what they're paying you for, right? To do the work and hand it off. If they get the app, they can sell it. But a couple caveats. One, as software developers, there's often kind of tools, algorithms, code, stuff that you reuse from project to project. And on a specific project, kind of like the special sauce, right? And that gets developed. I'm not a developer myself, but I talk to enough of them to know that this is the case. From project to project, you maybe it's a graphics engine or something, right? And you used it in one piece of client work, and you really, you developed it and you added some cool stuff. And you do another piece of client work and you want to reuse chunks of that engine and develop it further. You don't want the contract that you sign to mean that you can never reuse any of that code at all. So there's a way to create a carve out. And the term that's generally used or that I would use is developer tools, which are kind of like the family jewels, the special sauce. And basically, and I have wording for it that I put in, but it's a way of saying, look, the client owns everything in the final app, but except for the specific stuff that we're going to call developer tools, which are the non-specific algorithms, whatever, code structures, engines, whatever, define what it is that you're likely to have. That stuff is still owned by the developer, and the developer, instead of assigning it to the client, gives them a very broad, a license, a perpetual, fully paid license to use all that stuff only in the context of this app. So basically, from the client's perspective, it's still the same. They walk away with an app that they never have to come back to you for rights. They never have to ask you permission again. They can sell it free and clear. It's all good. But they cannot hand it off to someone else, have them reverse engineer your graphics engine, and then use that in future apps. And they cannot come after you for using your engine in future programs. But they get the assurances that you can't come after them for using it as long as they use it as it's embodied in that specific project. So that's a good way to carve out the rights that you need going forward. I think that's very important, and that's what makes the difference between some contract I downloaded off the internet versus something that's been drafted by a lawyer who's in the industry and is trying to make sure that you've got all your ducks lined up. The other thing I would say about the IP section is this. You will probably, if they hand you the contract, it will probably say everything that you do, that the developer does, is considered a work made for hire as under the US copyright laws. The company owns it, blah, 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 blah. Work for hire is a very specific, what they call a term of art. It's one of those magical terms that means something very specific. And what it means is that the company is considered the author of all the copyrightable material, of the software, of everything, which matters because remember when we said as soon as you save the code, as soon as you draw the picture, you own the copyright? It's sort of a dodge in the copyright law that says if you have a contract that ahead of time in writing agrees that this is work made for hire, then we're overwriting that default rule and we're saying that the company who hired you counts as the author, even though they didn't really do it, they hired someone to do it. That has a very practical impact. And that practical impact is if you finish everything and then they're like, haha, we're not paying you, they still own the copyright because it was work made for hire. And so now you can still sue them for breach of contract. You can yell at them, you can send them threatening letters, and you may win, but you've given up a key piece of leverage because they own the copyright. They still have breached contract and you can go after them. But there's another way to structure it, which is to say, actually, everything we create is owned by us until we get the final payment. And upon us getting our final payment that's provided in this contract, we automatically agree to immediately assign all the rights and everything other than that developer tool license that I talked about. We assign everything to you. It's effectively the same thing. At the end of the day, if they're going to pay you like good clients, then they end up with the same thing. They end up with the app that they own. They never have to talk to you again. They're good. But if they were going to screw you and run away, well, now not only can you sue them for breach of contract because they agreed to pay you and you delivered, but they don't own the copyright. And you can now turn around and see, this is our little callback here. You can now go and send a cease and desist letter or a DMCA takedown notice to the App Store and say, Apple, here's a contract that states explicitly that until I'm paid, I own all this code. I wrote all this code. I was not paid. They have released this app. I did not give permission. It contains my copyrighted code. Take it down right now. Or at the very least, you can threaten to do that. Like, hey, you need to pay me in the next week or I'm going to email Apple, which is a much stronger threat than pay me because you're supposed to pay me. I mean, they're both still, in both cases, you have a strong case, but practically speaking, if they've become a flake and they don't want to pay you, they're going to be a lot more scared in the immediate sense of having their app taken down than they are of like answering letters, stringing you along, like they can string you along for 6 months saying, oh yeah, we'll pay you. Oops, we couldn't, back and forth, back and forth. So that's another good thing to do that's in your favor. They may not like it because it's definitely in your favor, but the argument is, well, if you plan on paying us, then why are you concerned about this?
Yeah, those are some early stage signals that you should be concerned about. I always like to think that if I only like to do business with honest people.
Right. So those are all the big ones. 2 tiny ones, because I know I went on forever on this. Make sure that there's a provision for attorney's fees. I know that sounds self-serving, but actually having a provision that if there's a lawsuit or a dispute, the winning party gets their attorney's fees paid. That discourages people from bullshit lawsuits. It means that people don't take you to court unless they really think they're going to win. Because if they lose, they pay your attorney's fees. So that's one of those things that goes in the end, where they list like 17 additional provisions. And the last thing, it's nice if you want to get in the IP section a carve out what I call like a portfolio license that basically says the developer is allowed to reproduce certain chunks of the work that they did just to display on their website or in their portfolio for advertising their skills. Just pre-authorizing that so that you don't have to come get permission to be like, I worked on this. Here's an example of the app I made and how great a developer I am. It's a useful thing to put that in there. So that's just another small thing. But yeah, that's my big thing. The big 4, how do you get out of it? How do you get paid? What's the scope? And how do the IP rights work?
Well, this is all amazing stuff. I'll tell you what, getting paid, of course, is a very attractive proposition.
Yes, I love getting
developers. So protecting yourself is important. I think we all get a little bit fuzzy-eyed on that, but thanks for breaking it down. So here's the thing. I think we're running out of time. I do want to invite you back at some point and talk more about. There's a couple other questions here, and I'm sure we'll get some more as a result of this video. So I definitely want to invite you back.